Painkiller Ghosts, Chapter 27, A Funeral with Empty Prescriptions, Part 1 of 2. It's a couple of days later now, and this is how it is. As Mama lay dying, no, not at all. Mama never lay dying. She just died in a flash, just like that. As time lay dying, yes, more like that. Time lay dying, thinking of Mama dying in a flash, just like that. Time ran out of painkillers the day after he identified Mama in the hospital morgue. He sucked on one the way like a bitter mint, walking to the hospital in his walking shoes, the ones he hasn't worn in forever, without socks. He sat in the waiting room for a while, sucking on a pill. He bummed a cigarette, walked out back and smoked it, and then went to the morgue. On the way home, he bummed another cigarette, smoked half of it, gagged, threw the cigarette on the ground, and threw up on the road. He walked home, unlocked the front door, left it wide open, grabbed the bottle of painkillers, and dumped the last two from the container onto the countertop. He's wearing his corduroys, and he has 3 pennies in his pocket. He'd been rubbing the pennies together when he was in the waiting room, and then outside smoking, and then in the morgue, and then on the way home, rubbing them together. He took one of the pennies and smashed both pills on the countertop, and he puts his nose on the pile, snorts as hard as he can. Then he licks the remainder of the bitter white-yellow pile, gags, and cries. Then he sits on the front steps, looking to where Suzanne's car would have been if it didn't end up in an oak tree in the dark and the rain. He had the rest of his marijuana with him. He rolls a joint with all that he has left. He sits there and slowly smokes it while joggers jog by. He sat there smoking it as a red car slowed down as it passed. And he sat there smoking his joint, staring up into the sky, focusing on nothing. He sits there smoking and he cries, with tears falling down onto his shoes. He hears a whimper from down next to his dirty shoes. He sleeps in those shoes that night, and when he falls asleep before dusk, he falls asleep on the sofa in front of the television. He woke up at midnight, stumbled around, heard creaks in the house, felt in his pocket for his pipe, hid it empty, got a little smoke from the black tar inside, and shuffled down the hallway to his bedroom. He slept all the next day, waking at dinner to call Erin at the store, who knew about Suzanne's death. She'd seen the obits. She told Time she'd pick him up and take him to the funeral the next day. He stretches and closes his eyes, and he thinks he hears creaks in the hallway, her footsteps, and he thinks he hears Mama's voice in the kitchen, and he thinks he can smell her tea in the air. He opens his eyes. He can't get any rest recently. He checks here and there for pills he may have squirreled away, but he finds nothing. He pulls the glass pipe from his pocket. He's still wearing the same pants and shirt and shoes as last night or yesterday afternoon, whichever. He finds a pocket knife, 3 paper clips, 2 jumbo, 1 regular, and grabs a piece of paper. He folds it in half and begins to prod the pipe with the paper clips. Within minutes, his fingers are black and pungent. There is a pile of black goo on the paper, and he rolls it into a ball and sticks it into the pipe. He walks out the front door. He closes it but doesn't lock it behind him. He walks down the street. It's basically dark, and he's walking on his shoed feet and holding the lighter to the bowl every minute or so, and holding his breath in for almost a minute, then exhaling and doing it again. It finally turns gray, and it's time to go home. It's done. He wants to smash his pipe all of a sudden, so he takes it and he throws it down the street as hard as he can, and nothing happens. He smashes his heel onto the pipe, but ends up only hurting his leg. It never breaks. He throws it as hard as he can. He hears it hit the street and still not break. He keeps walking. Time says to himself, that's it. That's it. No more painkillers. He walked up to where the bowl lay in the road. He kicks it and it shatters. This is the same day, and this is how it is. Chastity stole a newspaper from a house on the block next to hers. She's a virgin, not an angel. And she was flipping through the obituaries when she saw Exler, Suzanne. The obituary said that she was in her mid-60s and survived by a son, Timothy X. Exler. She saw when the funeral was, found her black dress and ironed it, even though she hadn't done that in years, and she went to bed early on the sofa watching the news. Now, Mama's dead. And time has written a eulogy for her, just for her. Suzanne Exler, Mama Time, was a rolling stone that rolled and rolled and rolled, but gathered no moss, and will one day sooner be turning to dust. Yet Mama was a jazz record. She was that trumpet, you know the one. She was the blood running through the drummer's veins. She was the sweat on the piano keys, the beating kick drum. She was that hi-hat cymbal that would crash. And she burned on the inside, and she yearned on the inside, and she was a jazz. A jazz is not so stoned-like. A jazz record, a jazz joint being smoked in the middle of a joke. No broken jazz, all burning jazz. Mama was a jazz that wasn't so stoned. No scratches, no skips, just solos. And you know it meant a thing because Mama had that swing. Suzanne had had her funeral arranged in advance. There was nothing much for Time to do but kill time. He found a shirt and some black pants that didn't look too bad, and thought about shaving, but changed his mind. Looked again for some pills, but to no avail. Found a tie and tied it around his neck. He had to untie it 2 or 3 times until he finally got it right. It had been years since he tied a tie. He'd been wearing and sleeping those khakis for days. He could still smell the morgue in the legs. The hospital antiseptic still clung to his hands. He hasn't showered, and his hands still smell like the cigarettes that he bummed. He takes off the khakis, doing it the hard way, keeping his walking shoes on, and pulling and tugging and yanking the pants over his shoes, and then pulling the black pants up over them, still sockless. He pulls the belt out of the khakis, and he remembers when he and Maria would use the belt to tie up and shoot up. He can't believe that Maria just popped into his head. She had brown eyes, but that was years ago. Erin pulls up in her car up front, also dressed in her best black, and she parks, walks to the door, knocks gently, and hugs Time when he opens the door, and he starts to cry again.